This is the chronological timeline section. This is the introduction to the chronological timeline. And of course, Hare Krishna, I'm Amayatma Das, and thank you for joining me again. And this is the first part of the chronological timeline section of the Ritvik, the definitive analysis presentation. The governing body committee for ISKCON, the GBC, have taken Srila Prabhupada's mission down a multi-guru path for the past 4+ decades. Although the original system they formed, called the Zonal Acharya system, became such a total disaster that alone nearly destroyed the ISKCON mission, the GBC stuck with the basic premise, which was that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada wanted multiple initiating Diksha Gurus to initiate their own disciples within his ISKCON mission after he departed. In fact, as many of the original 11 Zonal Acharyas began falling down right and left, the GBC began to increase the number of Diksha Gurus and have done so ever since. Over time, many more problems continued to arise on this path, for which the GBC continued to make a number of changes. To their credit, some of those changes in the later 30 years have been various attempts to try and restore Srila Prabhupada's importance and position within ISKCON while reducing and tightly regulating the authority of the new gurus. It was these actions that have, so far, kept ISKCON together as a mission. Despite continually making changes to their multi-guru system and the position of the GBC has remained resolutely fixed that the path of multiple gurus for the one ISKCON organization is the only path that Srila Prabhupada wanted us to take. For nearly 10 years, the rank and file members had no access to Srila Prabhupada's letters. Most notably, they were forbidden access to the July 9th letter, where Srila Prabhupada had given the names of the 11 men who the GBC themselves ordained as the first new acharyas. Once devotees gained access to the July 9th letter, they saw that Srila Prabhupada had only named those 11 men to act as his Ritvik representatives. On seeing this, a growing number of Prabhupada disciples, seeing how fraught the multi-guru system was, and how there were so many inconsistencies and innate conflicts and problems, and saw how perfect and conflict-free the Ritvik representative system would be, they began to promote the idea that Srila Prabhupada actually wanted to remain the one and only initiating guru for his ISKCON mission, where he would accept and initiate new disciples via their system of Ritvik representatives that he had set up and authorized. These devotees became convinced the GBC had either been mistaken in their understanding or were outright lying to everyone. After all, it was the GBC who purposefully kept the July 9th letter from the rank and file members. So this assumption was not without any reason or cause. The GBC, convinced the path they took was the path that Srila Prabhupada wanted, took a hard, strong, fisted stand opposing such an idea. They demonized the very idea of an ongoing Ritvik system, claiming that it was against Scripture. It was totally bogus. It was deviant and it was poisonous. It was a poisonous idea that had to be totally swept out of ISKCON, along with all of those who would dare promote it. Ever since, the two sides have basically stood their grounds. However, because the GBC are the leaders and authority in ISKCON, naturally the majority of the members, especially newer members who only wanted to be good followers of Srila Prabhupada in good standing with the leaders of his mission, have naturally accepted the GBC position on this issue. Because those who support the Ritvik Ras path no longer hold any position of leadership in ISKCON, and were most of them were either kicked out of ISKCON or had to leave due to hostile atmosphere and environment. They are at a disadvantage as they are mostly outside of ISKCON and are portrayed by the GBC and their supporters as deviant, as fallen, and envious devotees who must be totally rejected. While this has put the devotees who support the Ritvik Ras path at a great disadvantage, the fact that they are mostly no longer active members of ISKCON does not automatically make them wrong. And just because the GBC have held a position of leadership in ISKCON doesn't automatically make them right. In my personal story section of this presentation, I shared my own story of how I had come to accept the GBC's views on this issue, and I tried to help them in defeating what I also saw was a bogus idea. But due to a string of circumstances, which I explained in that story, I eventually was forced to study this issue for myself. Devotees now had access to the information found in the Vedabase, which we didn't have for many years after Srila Prabhupada's departure. From that information and from internet discussions online, I began to see crack after crack in the GBC's foundation of their multiple guru system. As I logically analyzed the various aspects of their system, time after time, I found their system to be totally at odds with the duties that His Divine Grace had prescribed to the GBC and within the system of management that Srila Prabhupada had set up and instructed the GBC not to change. I found that the introduction of multiple gurus in ISKCON forced very drastic changes in that system of management that Srila Prabhupada had given verbal and written instructions not to change. I then analyzed the actual position of the current gurus and found their position was not at all of that of a traditional guru. That the gurus were not the masters within the ashram in which they posed themselves as spiritual masters. That is at total odds of what a traditional actual guru is. In so many ways, as I analyzed these and many other aspects, I found the current multi-guru system to be full of ever-widening and impossible to resolve cracks and just unresolvable innate problems. On the other side, as I examined and analyzed the Ritvik Ras path, I saw that it had no such flaws. And following it would resolve all of the major issues facing ISKCON. It would restore the system of management to what it was when Srila Prabhupada ordered that it not be changed. I then analyzed if it was actually deviant. And was it actually against Scripture, as the GBC had been adamantly declaring that it had been for so many decades? And I concluded just the opposite. That the very concept is solidly based on the higher principle of Guru Sadhu Shastra. And that instead, I found the very basis of the GBC's main argument against the Ritvik Ras as being actually and truly deviant and totally against Scripture. What my analysis led me to conclude was that the basic premise on which the GBC stood in rejecting the ongoing Ritvik Ras path is that Srila Prabhupada's spiritual potency to give spiritual initiation came not from his eternal spiritual life force and his divine eternal instructions, but from the totally bogus idea that Srila Prabhupada's spiritual potency to give spiritual initiation was contained only within his living temporary earthly Vapu body. And that when that earthly Vapu form died, so did his spiritual potency to give spiritual initiation. I found that premise to be totally abhorrent, against the principles of Vaishnav teachings, and deviant. The exact same thing that the GBC was accusing the Ritvik Ras path to be. All of that I already covered in my personal story section. The other major part of my study on this issue has to do with what I and many others consider to be the most important aspect of this issue. And that is, what did Srila Prabhupada actually want regarding this issue? What did he actually say in this regards? Which path did he want us to take and still wants us to take? Those questions are addressed and answered here in this chronological timeline section of this presentation. Here I will present and analyze what Srila Prabhupada actually said and didn't say on this topic in a chronological timeline fashion. As I do so, I will also reveal when and how the GBC became confused on this issue and when they wound up reaching totally wrong conclusions. The presentation will continue on after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, giving the more important developments in the GBC's path over the decades, mostly, however, concentrating on the first months as the GBC began to take us down this multi-guru path. I will also document why the Ritvik path was not immediately known by the vast majority of the members and why it took so many years for this knowledge to slowly come out. Other than Srila Prabhupada's general teachings and Scripture's general teachings regarding the disciplic succession, when it comes down to what system for initiations that Srila Prabhupada specifically wanted within ISKCON after he departs, there are only 2 dates where Srila Prabhupada specifically gave instructions on this specific issue. Those were at the last official meeting between Srila Prabhupada and the GBC, which was held on May 28, 1977. And the second is the Ritvik Appointment Directive, or letter, written on July 9th, 1977. It is the information and instructions that Srila Prabhupada gave on these 2 dates that either side have based their conclusions on regarding this issue, and for good reason, because these were the only times that Srila Prabhupada specifically and explicitly dealt with the question of how he wanted initiations to be conducted after he departs. Because correctly understanding these 2 sources of instructions are 100% vital to understanding what he really wanted on this issue, I spend considerable time analyzing those 2 events, as well as the related instructions or events surrounding them. This section is long, and therefore I have included its own table of contents. The main purpose of the chronological timeline segment is to analyze what Srila Prabhupada actually said and what he actually wanted, and what he didn't say or want. The secondary purpose is to highlight when and where and how the GBC got it all wrong and went wrong on this issue. This section concentrates mostly from April 22nd, 1977, which was about 3 weeks before Srila Prabhupada announced that he would be leaving this world soon, until March of 1978, when the GBC officially embarked down their multi-guru path. Many events took place afterwards, but aren't vitally important to the purpose of this presentation. However, a few of the events after March of 1978 I considered relevant to the basic issue and elaborate on, such as Srila Sridhar Maharaj's involvement in helping the GBC, how to try and implement and fit in multiple gurus into the system that Srila Prabhupada His Divine Grace had left us to follow. He did this based on what turned out to be flawed and faulty information the GBC gave him as to what they had mistakenly and wrongly thought Srila Prabhupada wanted. I also document Srila Sridhar Maharaj's final stand on this issue, where he fiercely upheld and defended the Ritvik representative system. Many other events that took place after March of 1978 will not be part of the video presentation. They will be in text form only. Most only give headlines, and only some have a short additional description in text. To the side is a table of contents, which can also be referred to as a menu list, listing the events in the timeline by the order of their dates. You can click on any event to view that section, then come back to the main timeline menu, or you can select and play the All button below, and the presentation will play each segment in the order listed, one after the other, from start to finish. I highly recommend going through the entire presentation in the chronological order the first time through.